I had air base. Yeah, I have air base. This is in Montana.
Okay, good evening. Would like to reconvene to public session Wednesday, August 16th, 2023 at 7:06 p.m. And if we would rise, salute the flag in a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Recommend approving tonight's agenda as submitted.
So moved.
First by Mrs. Isler, second by Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Approval of minutes. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education regular meeting of June 21st, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education Student Disciplinary Hearing of June 21st, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education Reorganization Meeting of July 5th, 2023.
So moved.
First,
Second.
Mr. Nichols, second, Mrs. Pugh, I believe.
Yep.
Roll call vote. Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education Special Meeting of July 5th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Lee?
Approved.
So approved. Recognition of guests. We have none. Any communication from board members? We'll start with Mr. Lee.
I hope everybody enjoyed their summer. It's about that time, and looking forward to a fantastic school year. So thank you.
Ms. Pugh?
Same thing, and good luck. And to the whole community, good luck to a great school year. And remember, our staff, our teachers are only human, and our students are only kids. Just have a good year.
Mrs. Isler?
Kind of ditto and double ditto. The same, and speaking a blessing over our school year coming up, and just hoping that everyone has had a good summer and know that it's time to wind back down and get back on the saddle and get to riding the horse again.
Mr. Nichols?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I do hope that we have everybody would have a prayer for the people in Maui. The more I saw that, the more it reminded me of Dresden or something. They've got quite a lot to deal with, so say a prayer for them.
Very true. Okay, thank you. And I know you've all been busy, all administrators over here, you've all been busy already all summer, but the big yellow buses will be pulling in a week.
Yeah.
So you'll all be ready, I know you will. Okay, public participation. First, we have Mrs. Angie Cunningham. Mrs. Cunningham, I'll go over the board policy again. You're allowed 5 minutes to speak. Mrs. Isler will, as soon as you say your first word, she'll start the clock. And wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange that for a place on the board's agenda. And that must go through the superintendent of schools. The speaker, you may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that all their requests may be directed to the board. Action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Okay.
I have been speaking on the violence happening in the school district since March. Yet 5 months later, we are no better off than when I began. To recap what has happened, first, I was laughed at for mentioning President Trump. Instead of laughing, perhaps administration should learn from Trump. On his watch, there were no wars worldwide. However, on the watch of this school administration, our kids are entering a war zone daily, while simply attempting to get an education. So instead of laughing at the man, perhaps learn from the man. Second, I had a board member reach out to me to ask the specific details of my daughter's assault and injuries. The board member was given all the information needed. That was in April, and then complete silence. How can parents have any faith or trust in the board or administration? Since I last spoke, the staff member was injured during an altercation in the school. Many ideas and suggestions have been given, yet the only policy change is one that attempts to silence the parents from speaking out about what is happening to our children and calling out those responsible for what is happening to our children in the schools. That policy infringes on our First Amendment rights. Why is it the only thing that's changed is to protect the administration and not our children? Why am I told in an email that the board does not have to respond to public comment, but they acted quickly to respond on the policy to try and silence public speakers? Our cries for help continue to fall on deaf ears with the administration. However, I can assure you that the bullying and the violence our children are facing is being heard. I was given an opportunity to speak last week about the challenges and the violence and bullying happening in this district. And so far, we've had 20,000 views nationwide and counting. We the parents are being heard. No longer can the bullying and violence and the challenges our kids face be swept under the rug or contained behind the doors of the good old boys club. As I stated in March, and I will state it again today, protected by my First Amendment right, Superintendent, it is your duty to protect our children and your staff while they are in the school. I stated then that if you are not able to do so, let someone else do it. If you are competent, this is a new year with opportunities to make changes to protect the children and the staff. I am stating a fact. At this point, you have not proved your competency. If I'm wrong, please, by all means, prove me wrong. Let this be a year where no child is permanently injured from an assault. Let this be a year where dozens of videos of children being bullied and assaulted are not posted on social media. Let this be a year where you start to earn respect and trust from parents and respect from the students. The students have no respect for administration, or they will not act out the way they do. They know there are no consequences for their behaviors. Let this be a year that qualified staff are hired and that we can retain them because they feel supported by administration and they feel safe coming to work. But most importantly, let this be a year that everyone in administration and board members realize that you are elected by the parents to be mouthpieces for the parents and for the children. You are not elected to remain silent. It is time to be the mouthpieces you were elected to be, instead of hiding behind the provisions and the FOIA that state you do not have to reply to public comment.
Mrs. Cunningham.
Yes.
Mrs. Cunningham.
Yes.
First of all, it's criticism, and as our rule states, we will not hear complaints about school personnel.
It falls under the board's preview, therefore it's protected by the First Amendment right.
Second of all, the board will not be answering any of your questions because you have stated on the radio that you are engaging in litigation against the district. However, as we have shared with you before, you can schedule a meeting with Dr. Larimore through his assistant, Mrs. Lori Lewis, sitting right over here, or email him your questions.
Okay, I have been told that you can respond. It does not have to be a parent meeting one-on-one with the superintendent.
This is through our attorney that I'm saying this to you.
And had I been given the opportunity before I had to seek legal counsel, then I would have went that route. If I had been acknowledged, what happened to my daughter had been acknowledged, I would have not had to go the legal route and get counsel. So the fact, I'm just trying to make sure that no other parent and no other student has to go through what my daughter has to go through daily. If it were your students or your child's situations, you would understand. If you had to watch a video of your child getting beat brutally to the fact that she has a concussion, they thought she had a broken neck, then maybe you understand why.
Okay, Mrs. Cunningham, that's all.
Well,
Thank you.
Understand that.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep fighting for the children.
Thank you, that's fine.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Next, we have Mrs. Carol Timmons. And also, I will review the board policy. You'll be allowed up to 5 minutes, and as soon as you say your first word. Also, persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for place on the board's agenda, and that's done through the superintendent, Dr. Larimore. And speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that all their requests may be directed to the board. Action and answers to the questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Mrs. Timmons, you may begin.
Board members, I would like to ask you why you hold the position on the board that you do, that you're not advocating for the children in this district. The board should consist of parents who actually have children in the district. If you have children in the school system, your children are being impacted by the ongoing bullying environments. Perhaps you would be more active in taking a stand. You sit here and are making there the challenges facing these children. However, you do nothing except break that your policy and attempt to silence the truth from being said. How will you prevent if your children are being targeted to the point where they do not want to come to school, becoming so depressed, they become suicidal? This is happening. This is happening to children. When you get involved then, you'll enter a child. When you make changes then, and as I stated before, some of the administration's children attend other districts instead of the one that they should be in. And that's really hard. I don't understand why that they can't be in the system, whether their parent is working. But anyway, all those children to face the challenges that the children in this district face. Every child is equal and deserves a safe learning environment. And yet, month after month, we're all just sit here and do not take the pleas of parents seriously. Perhaps instead of sitting on the board, you need to find other topics that you know crossword puzzles so that the people that actually care and are willing to make the change have an opportunity. When children tell their parents that they are very good in school, are you really doing your job? What if you are afraid to work every day and you cannot speak for yourself? Would you not want someone to speak up and give a voice for you? That is exactly what you are supposed to do. These are children. They are counting on the people that can make a difference to do so. Yet they are continually let down. These are difficult times we're living in. Our children are facing issues that none of us have to face, and each of you that sit here are in a position that can make a difference, but you choose to remain silent. Once again, just ask yourself, what is this for my child? Watch the videos of the brutal assault and ask yourself, if that child, or your child, you were watching being beaten, kicked, while others stand by and laugh and no one does anything, and if other people record it and post it on social media, the issue is ongoing in these schools are impacting the children for a long time. When we were in school, I can assure you, those issues were dealt with immediately by administration. Why? We had administrators that cared. We had administrators that listened, and most importantly, we respected our administration because we knew they had our back. There's no trust in this administration. Lack of competent leadership has allowed this to get so far out of control that it's going to take everyone here to step up and do the job today to regain control. The board members have to respond to public speakers, so please let me know how I can expect a response to my concerns. I have my email. I have no intentions of meeting with Mr. Ramore. On a one-on-one basis, but I would like an answer, or you know that some of this is being taken into consideration to make things better for these children. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Donna Reed, and welcome. I would like to just review the board policy with you, which I'm sure you're familiar, and that is you'll be allowed up to 5 minutes, and as soon as you say the first word, Mrs. Isler will start the timer. If you would like a longer period, you can arrange through the superintendent, Dr. Larimore, for a longer period. You may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and will be used. The board president will have authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that although requests may be directed to the board, action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. You may begin.
But I won't be discussing politics or religion. Anyhow, the last year and a half have been really tough for me. And it was kind of tough today when I had my mailbox. Did anybody get their property tax bills today? Yeah. And I called over to the county tax office. They said you have to talk to your school district. I kept trying to get up with Ms. Lewis and Ms. Horsey, and Ms. Lewis explained a little bit to me about it, but they took a giant jump. When, the referendum came out several years ago, we knew these taxes were going to go up, they were going to go up, they were going to go up, they were going to hit a plateau, they were going to start coming down. The last 2 years, they came down a little bit from 4.2498 to 4.2478, and then they took a jump this year, 0.6642. I don't know about anybody else, but if you we used to have a farm, well, we still have the farm, but we no longer have. Well, I no longer have income from the farm because sadly the chicken houses collapsed in January of 2022. Anyhow, but from speaking to Ms. Lewis, she said it's because of special education and stuff like that. Isn't there any kind of grants that can be applied for to get help? Because I'm telling you, this is gonna kill a lot of people. I will probably have to sell my farm, not because of the taxes going up, but because it's too much for me to take care of at 70. And I would like to stay in the Laurel area, but I might look somewhere else. Close, I don't have any kids, any grandkids, anything in the Laurel School District. I might look somewhere else to buy land or buy a house or something. And I'm telling you, when the rest of the people get, especially farmers, when they get their tax bills, today, tomorrow, Friday, next week, they're gonna be saying, what the hell? You know, y'all need to do this. You know, I understand that, you know, we need special education and all, but there needs to be something done to give the taxpayers a break, because we have the highest tax rate in Sussex County. Plus, we have a $24.30 per adult, I'm assuming, capitation tax on top of that. I mean, it's ridiculous. There needs to be something done, and I bet you're gonna start getting a bunch of phone calls, because when I look at my tax bill, I got wrote, even with the senior citizen discount. But then, you know, I got a lot of farming friends, and when they start getting their tax bills in the mail and look at them, they're, you know, it seems like the burden of the taxes is put on too few have to pay too much. So I'm just asking, number one, make it public why the taxes went up. I mean, we have no vote, no choice in what Sussex tax does. I mean, they can, you know, they don't need referendums or anything. But the taxpayers in Laurel, Delaware don't expect a giant jump like this when the taxes were going down a little bit each year and then they jump way up. They need to, and don't expect a lot of people to come to school board meetings, because I sat out front in the parking lot from 6:30, kept coming up, checking the doors all the time.
Okay, Mrs. Reed, what I would like for you to do, Mrs. Laura Horsey, I would like you get her number. So are you there tomorrow? She's our financial.
Yes.
Okay, and she can explain to you in detail.
Well, she briefly did, but
Nobody else is gonna know.
absorb all this information.
Maybe it would be a good idea if that was
Needs to
good
be something in writing.
on the website, put on the Laws District website, put in the Law Star.
Paper.
To explain,
on the
yeah.
Internet.
Right, well, the district website, on Facebook.
See, in your situation, because I had it too, so what you can do is, you gotta give it them people over to the county and get them to come over.
I did.
They did.
And we evaluate it.
That,
Right, because she's lost the chicken houses.
and my senior citizen
Are you
discount.
getting any chickens? You have any chickens now?
No.
The chicken house is collapsed.
So if you would, Donna, if you would reach out to Laura tomorrow, is there more
Talk to
you could
them, because
explain?
they hooked
Right.
me up.
Right,
Well, the county helped me, but it didn't, you know, I mean.
Brent, let her get together with Laura tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then, and I think we all agree, right, made a note that,
Public needs to be aware of this.
I agree, because I got mine. I have no chickens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. Next, we have the financial report.
In a minute.
Ms. Horsey. That's okay. Just go back to whatever he's doing.
continue.
Accomplishments since our last meeting that I was in June. There's a bunch because from July up to now. We had our fiscal year 23 closeout. We updated our salaries for our 12-month employees for the grades. We had our January end of year closeout procedures. The opportunity funds application was submitted along with technology block grant, Florida bond bill, our school safety security funds application. Our school construction audit for FY20 has a report sheet. It's been over the time. They asked for 3 reporting was submitted, the gap report. Also the IDEA maintenance of effort reporting. We've also applied for the Stronger Connections grant and also our consolidated grant applications. Things we're working on now, working on the salary updates for the 10-month employees, starting on a new contract year. We have transfers and new hires for the 23 and 24 school year. Our local funds audit for FY22 is in process. We have our next Citizens Budget Oversight Committee meeting on September 11th, and also September 30th, unit count is coming up. And we still have the enhanced MCI allocation that we'll be receiving towards the end of the year. And we've also received some new funds called Filter First. It's to be used for changing out some plumbing in some of the schools. And we have that plan usage to be a week by January 1st. This is a shot of our reserve and local fund. We did have an increase on the end of the year. That was due to unfilled positions that we had during the year. So that was a good thing in our favor. And this is where we're starting out with, if you did a comparison of the reserve and local fund balance, our non-commitment, which done previous fiscal year. And Mr. Nichols, you had asked before about the debt service tax rate, so this is a chart showing you over the years how the debt service tax rate has changed. It has been decreasing since FY22 about 0.02 cents each year. Any questions?
No questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the financial position report. Recommend to approve the August 1st financial position report as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mr. Nichols, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mr. Lee,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
and Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Okay, unfinished business, second reading, Laurel School District Code of Conduct Policy Revision. Recommend the second reading of Laurel School District Code of Conduct Policy as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education Policy section and as found at the Laurel School District sites.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. New business, school choice. Recommend approval of school choice as a group.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of school choice as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Lee. Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of fundraisers as a group.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of fundraisers as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Rentals, recommend to approve request of Amy Proctor of Trinity Foundation for use of Laurel Middle High School cafeteria, middle and high school gymnasiums, and concession stand on Saturday, April the 13th, 2024, from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. to host Big Pink Volleyball Tournament to raise funds for Cancer Care Center in Seaford. Cost $240 per team, certificate of liability insurance to be provided.
I recommend approval with use of facility fee, custodial fee, and constable fee applied.
Okay.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Lee?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend to approve request of Kelly Whaley, Sussex Tech Adult Education, for use of 2 classrooms at Laurel High School beginning on Mondays and Wednesdays, September 2023 to June 2024, from 2:45 p.m. to 4:45 p.m. for purpose of providing credit recovery classes for Laurel High School students, certificate of liability insurance provided.
I recommend approval of use of facility fee and custodial fees waived and constable fees applied.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mr. Lee?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend to approve the request of Penny Fry Good News Club for use of Laurel Elementary School cafeteria beginning 1 day a week on Tuesdays from September 2023 to March 2024 from 3:30 to 5 p.m. for purpose of providing Christian Club to LES students, certificate of liability insurance provided.
So moved.
I recommend approval, use of facility fee and custodial fees waived and constable, fees applied.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Lee?
Approved.
So approved. No professional trips, transportation walk zone recommendation of approving the Transportation Office to submit designated areas to the state's Unique Hazard Committee to review the following walk zones for transportation for the 2022-2023 school year: Discount Land Road, Woodland Ferry Road, County Seat Highway Route 9, and Laurel Road, Route 24 west of Laurel town limits.
So moved.
First, Mr. Lee, second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mr. Lee?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Okay, policies and resolutions. First reading, policy BDDH-R/KD-R, public participation at board meetings. Recommend the first reading of policy BDDH-R/KD-R, public participation at board meetings as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education policy section and as found at the law school district sites. This policy will be available for review by the community at the law school district buildings and on the district website. Community input is welcome and should be directed to the superintendent of schools no later than Tuesday, September 29th, 2023. First reading of policy
19.
19th, sorry. First reading, policy DFD-R and DFD-E 1 through 4, rentals and service charges. Recommend the first reading of policy DFD, DFD-R, and DFD-E1-4, rentals and service charges as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education policy section and as found at the law school district sites. This policy will be available for review by the community at the law school district buildings and the district website. Community input is welcome and should be directed to the superintendent of schools no later than Tuesday, September the 19th, 2023. Possible actions on executive session. Personnel, attachment A, professional. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment A.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Attachment B, support. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment B.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler. Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Lee.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Attachment C, coaches, recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment C.
So moved.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Lee. Mr. Nichols.
Nichols.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Lee.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh, I'm
You've done
sorry.
that to us a couple times.
I'm gonna name you that. Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
and Mr. Lee.
Approved.
So approved. If you hadn't laughed, I wouldn't know what I've done. Attachment D, cafe, recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment D.
So moved.
First,
Second.
Mrs. Isler, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
Mr. Lee,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Attachment E, administrator, recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment E.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Lee. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Lee,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. The next board meeting will be September the 20th, 2023, 7 p.m. right here, Long Middle School, High School cafeteria. Do I have a motion? We adjourn.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Lee,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
We adjourn at 7:42 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.